So along with Oppenheimer and Saltburn, Past Lives has been one of the most memorable movies of the year for me. I had seen the trailer and obsessed over it for months while I waited to see the movie, knowing that it would probably break my heart because movies like this always do. I was trying to find out if the director had made anything else or if this was based on a book because I just wanted more after watching it, but I was very surprised to learn that this was her directorial debut. And not just that, Past Lives is based partially on a true story of her own life. Anyway, if you know of any books, movies, or TV shows with similar themes, please feel free to share. And yeah, onto the summary. 3 people are sitting in a bar, a woman and 2 men on either side of her. Other people in the bar are observing them and they act as narrators, wondering what the relationship is between these 3 people. It seems like the woman is faced more towards the Asian guy, but the other guy is not exactly excluded. Their body language looks kind of relaxed and positive, but I don't know. There is still a tension there, and something tells me that this feels like a crossroads or a goodbye. 24 years earlier in South Korea, in Seoul, we meet Na-young. She's crying because she got second place in a test at school, and her friend, Hae-sung, came in first. He tries to make her feel better, but in a way that preteen boys would. Sensitive, but also kind of teasing. At home, Na-young and her sister are discussing their would-be English names with their parents, and Na-young is having some trouble finding an English name for herself. Her father suggests that Nora would be a good one. You see, the family is immigrating to Canada soon. The girl's mother is an artist, and their father is a film director. Na-young talks to her mother about Hae-sung. She's open about her crush on him, saying that she'll probably marry him one day. Both Na-young and Hae-sung's parents set them up then on a play date, with Na-young's mother wanting her daughter to have some good memories before they leave. The children are about 12 at this point, so they're at that age where they just hold hands and play and laugh together. It's puppy love. They walk home from school in silence on Na-young's last day. It's obvious that Hae-sung is upset about her leaving, and he talks very little on their walk home. The goodbye as well is very brief and impersonal. If this is because Hae-sung can't express his emotions in the moment, Hae-sung doesn't really know how to say goodbye to his best friend. The family makes it to Canada, and Nora's first day at her new school isn't great. Thankfully, we don't see her get bullied or anything. She's mostly just ignored, which actually is probably just as bad because you can sense the loneliness. The movie doesn't show much of her school experience other than this one shot of her during break, but the fact that this is the only one that we get is telling. Also, where is her sister in all of this? 12 years later, we see men in the army out on the field in their military training. It's obviously implied that Hae-sung is one of these men. Nora lives in New York City now, and she's a playwright. She talks to her mother quite often, and it's really heartwarming that they're close enough to chat and they gossip, they laugh a bit. And during one of these chats, they're talking about people that they knew from back in her childhood. Nora asks then if there's anyone else they can look up online, and she asks about Hae-sung. Only she doesn't mention him by name. She seems to have forgotten his name. She describes him as the boy that she had a crush on, who she went on a date with. Both she and her mother both remember then that his name is Hae-sung, and they look him up. Nora sees that Hae-sung had the same idea though. He had been searching for Nora as well, only much earlier. He'd posted on her dad's movie Facebook months ago that he was looking for her, hoping to get in touch, so she sends him a message. Hae-sung is an engineering student and he's at a bar with some friends when he gets a message. The next morning, he's hungover and going through his phone, and that's when he sees the message from Nora. Later, they call via Skype, and just before then, we see Nora rush home in anticipation for the call. It's really cute. She tells him then that she looked him up as a joke, but he says that it wasn't a joke for him. He tried really hard to find her. Hae-sung realizes that he couldn't find her because she goes by the name Nora now, but he asks if he can still call her Na-young, and thus begins their correspondence. They reminisce about their school days and their childhood. She tells him about her experiences when she first emigrated and how she cried a lot until she realized that nobody cared. I'm so comforted by these scenes because we don't really see Nora talk to anybody else except for her mother. Does she have friends? Does she date? We don't know. She doesn't seem outwardly unhappy, maybe just a bit of an introvert. In any case, their conversations are a realistic blend of some shy awkwardness, but that comforting nostalgia of 2 best friends who can still laugh at each other and tease each other. At one point, Hae-sung is surprised that Nora hasn't eaten dinner yet and it's already midnight, so he jokingly orders her to go and eat. Him making sure that she eats, I wouldn't say it's a common theme throughout the movie, but we're going to see something like this later on as well. Hae-sung tells Nora that he really likes this. He likes talking to her. He's incredibly earnest, but in a good way. And at one point, he gets this look on his face and he says that he's not sure if he can say this, but he missed her. She tells him that she missed him too, but the way she says it is a little different. She's a bit more lighthearted and she smiles, whereas he's a little bit more serious and emotional in his delivery. Anyway, he has to go to class just then, but we see a montage of them talking regularly. Even though so much time has passed, it seems as though they still care quite deeply for one another. That connection is still there. And so after a while, the inevitable happens. They want to take the next step. Not to something romantic or anything, just the next step in their friendship. They want to see each other. Well, the possibility of something romantic does kind of hang in the air, for me as the viewer at least, because I wasn't sure at this point if this was a friendship love story or if there might have been more. Either way, it's still incredibly romantic. But this is not something that they say out loud to one another. They just would like to see each other again. Or at least at first Nora does. She wants Hae-sung to come to visit her in New York, but he can't. He has plans to travel to China on an internship to learn Mandarin. And it's not that he doesn't want to see her, but it's just that his life is on this path and this is the practical thing for him to do for his career. And so he'd only be able to come to New York in a year and a half. They're also at quite different points in their lives now. I mean, after being in the army, Hae-sung is now studying, and so he is a little bit more limited than Nora is. Nora says that the soonest she could come to Seoul, though, is a year. This roadblock, plus the difficulties of maintaining this friendship across time zones and with often spotty internet connection, starts to make things difficult and frustrating, especially for Nora. Nora decides then that they should stop talking for a while. She wants to commit to her life in New York, and she doesn't want to spend all of her time searching for flights to Seoul. She tells him that it'll just be a brief break. Hae-sung really struggles with how much this upsets him, and he thinks that there's something wrong with him. When she apologizes to him, he says that she has nothing to be sorry about. It's not as though they were dating, but it's said more to try and snap himself out of it, because he's on the verge of tears now. He says that he spent 12 years trying to find his friend, and we can see that the prospect of losing her again is difficult for him, and he's open about it. Nora also has a difficult time with this goodbye. I mean, the reason she's saying goodbye to begin with is that she feels herself getting too attached when she knows that there's no prospect in the short term of this leading to an actual reunion in real life. Also, she's just moved to New York, so spending her time on this friendship, being online at odd hours, being tired, instead of investing in her life in the city, doesn't quite work for her now, and she wants to make her life in New York work. Anyway, he eventually does agree that a break might be a good idea, and they say their goodbyes. He is having a rough go of things though, and he goes for one last dinner with his friends before he leaves for China. Nora, meanwhile, goes to Montauk for her writing retreat thing. By the way, as I've said, she's never really shown with any friend, so her life seems kind of lonely, but she has just moved to New York, so that could explain things. A guy named Arthur also comes to the house to stay in the other room, and after a while she does make some friends, or we see her in social settings, and she and Arthur also start to get closer, and eventually they kiss. In China, Hae-sung isn't doing great. He's getting on with life, sure, but at least in the beginning, we can see that he's heartbroken. So it's interesting and probably normal that Nora seems more comfortable speaking English now, and Hae-sung had pointed out to her that her Korean was a little rusty. I mean, she'd only still spoken Korean to him and her mom. So the conversations that she has with Hae-sung, although not in any way less significant, just kind of have fewer words than the ones that she has with Arthur. This does change a little bit throughout the movie as they move beyond just the catch-up phase of their reunion and their conversation starts to have a bit more depth. Still though, there's a lot of non-verbal communication between the two, body language, facial expressions, and that's always really interesting to decipher because so much is also said without words, or so much is communicated without saying anything. Another 12 years passes by and Nora and Arthur are now married. We see them get back to New York from Toronto after having visited Nora's family. Arthur is a pretty successful writer and he speaks some Korean, and they seem to have a really good marriage. As they're walking down the street, she mentions to him, well, she reminds him, because she's mentioned it before, that Hae-sung is coming to New York on vacation. Back in Seoul, Hae-sung's friends, who are good, supportive guys, do kind of tease him about going to see that girl. But he says no, she's married. He arrives in a gloomy, rainy New York, and on the day of the reunion, we see him standing there looking quite uncertain as he waits to see Na-young. She goes in for a hug at first, and he's quite stiff and uncertain at first, and then he loosens up. He mentions that the last time they spoke was 12 years ago, which is kind of heartbreaking because that means that break wasn't at all brief. This meeting is just so surreal after all of this time, and you really get to see both of them just taking it all in. As they take the subway and go for a walk, they get to talking, and we find out that Nora and Arthur were in Korea before they got married, and Nora was disappointed that she didn't get to see Hae-sun because she did email him. He apologizes, and she says that she also wanted to meet his girlfriend, but he says that they're not together anymore. It's not exactly that they've broken up, but he just needed some time to think. I sometimes can't get a read on Nora, and maybe it's because I can't relate to how rather well adjusted she is in the face of all this. It's Hae-sun who still seems to have so much that he might want to say, but can't. Anyway, he says that they were talking about marriage, but it's complicated. He feels that she should marry somebody with more money, somebody more impressive, not somebody ordinary with an ordinary job who makes ordinary money like him. It's pretty tragic and ironic that this extraordinary character thinks of himself as ordinary and not good enough. They talk about their partners and their families, and Nora kind of keeps things light and moving. Hae-sun, on the other hand, is a little bit more contemplative. I do wonder if that's because Nora, for the most part, has moved on with her life. And even when she did reach out, it was by chance, it was a joke. Whereas for Hae-sun, that was a very deliberate effort to find her. And there is a part of him that has been searching for her and waiting for this all these years. This reunion is important to both of them, but it's pretty clear that Hae-sun, he needed this. His whole vibe is a bit more slower moving. And even though he wasn't romancing her or saying anything at this point, I found him incredibly romantic. There's a tension between them two that they don't acknowledge. His look sometimes lingers, and she has these changing expressions, and she doesn't let herself look at him for too long. It's certainly not sexual tension or anything like that. I didn't find myself wondering and hoping for them to confess their love to each other. That would have been too cliche. But I don't really have the words to describe what this is, and I think that that's the point, because the characters are still kind of figuring it out for themselves as well. As they're sitting in the front of a carnival ride, she finally asks him why he looked for her 12 years ago. He asks her if she really wants to know, and she says yes. He says that she left so suddenly. She just disappeared from his life, and he wanted to see her one more time. He doesn't know, but he did keep thinking about her while he was in the military. She gets home that evening to Arthur and tells him that he was right, Arthur was right, that Hae-sun came to New York to see her. It only suddenly occurred to me in that moment then that this visit wasn't fully planned out by both Hae-sun and Na-yoon as a kind of reunion. He just took a chance and finally went to New York. While she goes home to Arthur, we see him sad and alone in his hotel room. Nora and Arthur are quite open about things. She talks to him about the dynamic between her and Hae-sun, and Arthur asks if he's attractive, and she says yes. And he asks if Nora is attracted to him, and Nora says no, she doesn't think so. She doesn't know. She thinks she just missed him. She doesn't dwell on this though. This isn't an issue for her. This whole conversation is also pretty casual. She's busy moisturizing, he's drinking water. He's the appropriate amount of interested without interrogating her or getting jealous right off the bat. We do see though later in bed that Arthur is affected by this. Who wouldn't be? He says that he doesn't have the right to be angry, but it's clear that he feels a little insecure. Nora assures him that they're fine. Later that evening, Arthur is still thinking about it, saying that this is a really good story and that he just can't compete. They're childhood sweethearts who reconnect 20 years later and realize that they're meant for each other. He asks Nora then if she's happy, and she tells him that this is where she ended up, where she's supposed to be. He makes an interesting comment then. He says that she makes his life so much bigger, and he wonders if he does the same for her. She says that he does and that she loves him. He tells her that when she talks in her sleep, she talks in Korean, never in English. She dreams in Korean, and while he finds it cute, he also gets scared that there's this whole place that he can't get to. She dreams in a language that he can't understand. I think I half fell in love with Arthur as well when he said this, because some of the things that he says are so poetic, probably without meaning to be. By the way, we also find out that while they are actually in love, Nora and Arthur, they did get married so that Nora could get a green card. Hae-sun and Nora meet the next day and take the ferry together, the Staten Island ferry, so that they could see the Statue of Liberty, and he brings something for her to eat that he'd packed in his backpack, which is such a small but very cute and thoughtful gesture. On the ferry, she shows him a wedding photo, and she tells him that she and Arthur got married a lot earlier than they'd planned because of the green card. While Nora and Arthur have a really good and solid marriage, there's just something about these two, about Nora and Hae-sun. What they have is so precious. I couldn't resist, just a couple of times, almost having a little bit of hope. Finally, Arthur and Hae-sun meet, and Arthur really makes an effort with his Korean, and it's really impressive. We also hear Hae-sun speak some English for the first time. The trio go out to have pasta for dinner, and then they go out for a drink, and then we get to the scene that we see at the beginning of the film, and I never would have guessed that this is what the situation was. I think Hae-sun starts to make peace with the answers that this trip has given him then, because he tells Na-young that it's good that she immigrated. Korea was too small for her, and he thanks her for introducing him to her husband. He says that he can tell that Arthur really loves her. Hae-sun says that he didn't know that liking Nora's husband would hurt this much. They almost do the dance then again. He tells her that when they lost touch, he really missed her, and she says that she missed him too, but then he says, well, then you met your husband. And she responds with, and you met your girlfriend. None of this is said with any kind of bitterness, but the tone has certainly changed here. And this is also the first time that either of them have acknowledged any kind of what if. And this is also barely an acknowledgement. Hae-sun says then that being there makes him have these weird thoughts, and he cycles through some of his what ifs. What if he came to New York 12 years ago? What if she never left Korea? I think that Arthur can sense the shift in atmosphere between them now, because they're no longer making an effort to include him, and their body language has changed somewhat. They're also exclusively talking in Korean, when before they were switching to English and also having Nora translate. It's not that they're doing this on purpose, it's just that the politeness between Hae-sun and Nora, the joking lightness, is momentarily gone, and there's no place for Arthur in this interaction now, while they're kind of getting to the heart of things. And while it doesn't look like the most comfortable situation for Arthur, he gives them their space. Hae-sun wonders if they would have dated, married, had kids, but he also realizes that the reason he liked Na-young is because of exactly who she is, and she is somebody who leaves. Na-young tells him that while the girl that he remembers doesn't exist here, she says that she does exist, and she left her behind with him 20 years ago. And then he finally tells her that he loved her. Once this is finally said, they include Arthur, and the mood becomes a little lighter again. Later, Hae-sun apologizes to Arthur for kind of leaving him out of the conversation, and he says that they'll stop. But Arthur says it's fine, they haven't seen each other in a while, and Arthur also tells him that coming to New York was the right thing to do. In the end, both Hae-sun and Na-young are waiting for Hae-sun's Uber to the airport, and it's incredibly tense. As though the conversation at the bar isn't quite done, they're not quite done. Well, all that's left to do now is to say goodbye, and at this moment I did have some misplaced hope. Just then, the Uber arrives, breaking that moment, but he does turn around and ask her, what if this is a past life, and what if they're already something else to each other in a next life? Who are they? She says that she doesn't know. He says he doesn't either. He leaves then, and she walks back home, and Arthur is there for her, and he comforts her as she cries. And that's the end of the movie. If this story was told any other way, I probably would have hoped that Nora would leave Arthur and her life behind to explore this lifelong friendship connection with Hae-sun. I'd have liked to see her go back to Korea, and I was really nostalgic for her Korean identity for some reason. I was quite intrigued by this idea of her living in these two worlds, culturally and then also in the past and present, and having these come together. It would have been nice to see her in Korea as an adult. Because we already kind of know who Nora is, but I don't know, I wanted to get a better sense of who Na-young was, if that makes any sense. But that's not the story. It might have been too cliche and easy for her to leave. It also would not have been true to Nora's character if she had just up and left her life. As for Arthur, I didn't think much of him at first when I saw their life together, but there was that scene where they were in bed together and he was speaking Korean. I knew then that he wouldn't just be the white husband that would be easily left behind when her old sweetheart came back into the picture. Seeing him go through the different phases of grappling with what Hae-sun's arrival could mean made him such an interesting character, because he was incredibly emotionally intelligent, understanding as much as he could be of Na-young's potential conflicting feelings, but he was also openly anxious that he couldn't compete. I liked that this was something that they were navigating together. In the end, there is a sense of closure. Hae-sun has opened his heart to Na-young, and I got the sense that he was never really there to win her over or anything. He just needed to do this regardless of how it ended for him. Nora was always a little harder for me to read, but she seemed to not let herself go there in her mind. At the very least, she didn't express that she had any what-if feelings and thoughts the way that Hae-sun did. She also made it very clear to Arthur that she wasn't in love with Hae-sun and that she wasn't thinking of running away with him. She didn't need to make a choice as such, because this was just her life and where she was supposed to be, but in that end scene, she still had to say that goodbye, that heartbreaking goodbye, and it was kind of cathartic to finally see her have that little breakdown in Arthur's arms. So many frames of this film are etched in my memory, especially those last scenes. You know, kind of like the fireplace scene in Call Me By Your Name, the beach scene in Morphe, or the final scene in Another Round. I sobbed uncontrollably in those two. Anyway, that's it for the summary. If you have seen the movie, feel free to share your thoughts, and thank you for watching.